summoner of demons and all things satanic. It is Peter Rollins.
Hello, it's great to be on the podcast. This is one of my favourite podcasts already, so I'm very privileged to get to actually participate.
Nice.
All right, yeah. Do you
That's
like
high
it when
praise.
people are like Doctor Peter Rollins, or do you just prefer kind of more down to earth thing?
More down to earth. I feel like an imposter with the doctor. Doesn't really
Makes you
mean
sound
very much.
like an evil genius.
When people use the word doctor in Europe, it's generally a sign that they don't have a good doctorate. If you ever see a book that says Doctor such and such, it generally is a bad doctorate. Anybody who has a doctorate doesn't generally talk about it.
I one time went into the office of the physical education guy in my university, and I wanted to talk to him about something. I wanted to ask him, and I was just like, "Hey, Mr. Fritz," and he wouldn't even look at me. He wouldn't turn to look at me, and I was just like, "Hello, Mr. Fritz," and until the secretary came in, and she's like, "It's not Mr., it's Doctor."
Oh my!
I mean, we're not
I
saying
said,
that.
"Oh my God!" I said,
Yeah.
"Dr. Fritz," and then he turned around, just, "How can I help you?" So he was very attached to his doctorate.
Oh my!
To be honest,
goodness.
Dr. Fritz sounds even more like an evil genius name.
Yeah.
But the
He
thing,
was
we're not
very,
saying that philosophy is a better subject than PE, but maybe
very
that's-
obsessed, very I suppose over attached to his mirror image, I would
To
say.
his symbolic title.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
He needed a little bit of the old castration.
Yes.
To use some of that.
Yeah. So
But anyway-
what's the topic for this week for you guys?
This week is it a weekly podcast? It's like an ad hoc podcast currently.
Ah.
So yes. But anyway, so the topic is, or the film is, Quantum of Solace. We are talking about James Bond and the
No,
theoretical
Bond,
implications.
James Bond.
James Bond. Okay. Well, you are the expert, seeing as you're like a big fan of James Bond.
Yes, that's
Correct.
true. I am. I do love James Bond. I always have.
We wanted to do a few other pictures, but I think Peter was just like, I've just seen like a lot of the James Bond, John Wick, some of the Bruce Willis ones, mostly action movies, right?
Yeah, I know it's terrible. I kind of like to think that I like good cinema, but I just like action movies pretty much. Give me some Steve Seagal and I'm happy.
But there's some good
Brilliant.
stuff. There's some good stuff to talk about with Quantum of Solace.
Oh, yeah.
It's the most political Bond movie.
Yes, that's true. That's true. And I think, a lot of the themes are there that are like reminiscent of all the Bond movies. So there's plenty to dive into.
Absolutely,
So what
because
is
it's
it about-
interesting.
Oh, go ahead. Yeah.
No, sorry, we're on a three-way Skype, so we're gonna like be talking over each other a little bit probably. But I was going to say that it's an interesting Bond because we were talking about Daniel Craig as Bond, or this iteration of Bond, as compared to the other Bonds like Roger Moore, the 90s Bond, the best Bond. No, I don't think he is the best Bond, but he's the Bond of my childhood, Pierce Brosnan. And he is, conventionally Bond is very much kind of a non-split subject. But Daniel Craig's version of Bond has a little bit of, he's carrying a little bit of trauma in screenwriting, call it the ghost. He has like a trauma in his past that we know about. Whereas the other versions of Bond, he's the non-castrated male. I don't know. He doesn't, he has no kind of element to him.
Yeah, I mean that's a
Edge.
very common, that's a move that's happened in cinema over recent years that now you have to have a backstory for superheroes and heroes, that it's not enough to just put them on screen. They have to have some sort of like a traumatic event. So even with Batman, you see that obviously the recreation of Batman is very much connected to his trauma. I suppose it was always there to some extent, but now there has to be
It's
some
overt.
animating trauma. Whereas
Yep.
the baddies don't need to have that. The baddies have an excess of money, an excess of pleasure, an excess of everything. And we hate them for it.
I know. Well, it's interesting because it's not only James Bond or film characters. It's everywhere in capitalism now. It's like, what is your private story? What commodity of hurt do you have?
Yes, I mean the one enemy is the person who has no trauma, and that's what the fantasized enemy is. So like within James Bond, you have Spectre. In Quantum of Solace, of course, they're trying to get all of this money by controlling the water supply in Bolivia, but they already have phenomenal resources. I mean, so already you kind of have an organization that is pretty much omnipotent. They are without trauma. They are without suffering. They are having pure enjoyment, and it's all of the goodies that have, James Bond. The women that he loves are always dying. That's the big thing. Is not only is James Bond got a founding trauma with the death of his parents. Continually, anybody he loves, including the woman he married in one of the early Bonds, are all killed.
Yeah.
So yeah.
I have kind of a theory about this whole new trend of trauma being included into the narrative of characters that are meant to be non-castrated, and it's that I think that for the audience, maybe the object cause of desire is the possibility of neuroses arising in the character, because, for example, for James Bond, what you have is that he's willing to go through physical violence in order to not go through or not acknowledge the inner violence of his life or his. And as long as he has like the imperative of his missions and like the things that he has to do, like his inner void can always be like put to the side or evaded. So something that I always liked about Freud is that when he talks about repression, he doesn't say that it's just like the things that you repress, but it's actually the repression of the repression. And I think that he goes through extreme like physical pain in order to be able to afford that repression of repression.
Yeah. And it's something they
so
really...
I think that, for the spectators, I think that there's a thrill in wondering when it's going to happen for Bond, when he's going to have sort of like a neuroses, like an encounter with neuroses. And I think it happens at the end of, what's the one before this one? Casino Royale, because he falls in love. And after he falls in love, he wants to resign from the company or from the CIA or whatever.
MI6.
Yeah, he wants to quit, and it's just like, I think that's like the object cause of desire for the audience. It's just like hoping that something will happen, but at the same time getting enjoyment that it never actually happens to him.
Yeah, exactly. That's really true. Yeah.
And that really happens in an extreme in Skyfall, because in Skyfall he literally returns to his childhood home and has to confront his upbringing, and that's, I suppose, out of all of the recent Bonds, that's the one that is perhaps most critically acclaimed, because I think it has, like you're saying, that kind of, we're waiting for Bonds to kind of that stuff to come to the surface. And I guess this is my theory for 25, which is the next Bond, which will be the last Daniel Craig Bond, is that will be brought to completion in some way. And it might even be that they kill him off. I don't think they could kill him off, but there's probably, just like the last Batman, like Batman literally faces his suffering, is able to subjectivize it, and therefore it can no longer be Batman. Like, he literally can't be Batman anymore. He goes off to be with the woman.
Well, and I also find it very interesting that he falls in love in Casino Royale, and it sort of ruins his life. And then in this next movie, Quantum of Solace, there is no Bond woman, right? Or at least there's no sex. He doesn't sleep with anybody.
Yeah, it's the only one he doesn't.
Well, with one person, he sleeps with the red-headed woman.
Yes, Strawberry Fields.
Okay.
But not the main Bond, not the main,
not the main
female Bond girl.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. But she
So it's
dies, doesn't she? She's another one who dies after being part of Bond's love life.
Yes.
Strawberry Fields, yes. I have to just say that name. Like, the names in Bond are hilarious, because obviously, often in narrative fiction, you have names that are symbolic or evoke something, and people like Charles Dickens are very good at, having names that evoke the character, but like the Bond names are just fucking hilarious. Like the villain in this one is what's this Dominic Green, and it's all about eco stuff. And I don't know what the hell like Strawberry Fields is like a Beatles song. I don't know if there's like a they're all a bit ridiculous.
Another thing that I thought that was interesting about like the Bond movies is that, for example, you can have a movie from like the 80s before this whole thing started. Like, you probably know these, Peter, like Universal Soldier with Van Damme. And where it's just like, you have this guy that is like a soldier, and he's obviously non-castrated as well, but there is no risk in it at all.
Yeah.
Like he's almost kind of deprived of his humanity, not just that he's non-castrated, but he doesn't have humanity either. So he just like obeys and goes through the violence and whatever, but there's almost no risk. I think there's a correlation with that as well with some of the new superhero movies. I think that's something that Todd was talking about. It's just like, it's just seeing immortality on screen. Like, not there's no risk, there's nothing that can happen. Actually, you have this guarantee that they're going to survive and that they're going to win. Yeah, which is like, I think that makes the prospect of 25 pretty interesting, because it might be actually very interesting if he dies or something happens to him. Yeah. But yeah, I think that one of the scenes of the Bond movies that I think is like the most suspenseful is the torture scene in what's the last one? Spectre.
Spectre, yeah.
Oh, yes.
Because he's about to be deprived of his humanity, and he might become sort of like a soldier thing, because I think that he goes through some machine that threatens to get to like who he is, or a kind of lobotomy, I think.
Yeah. Have you heard the great fan theory about that?
No.
Oh, it's brilliant. Just very quickly, it's very funny. So the fan theory is, because that's the very first Bond, that's kind of technically the origin story. So the idea is that James Bond is on that torture seat, and Blofeld puts that needle into his head, and Blofeld even says that this is going to disorient you. You're not going to know the face of the people you love. You're going to be basically, your whole world is going to dissolve. And the idea is that every other James Bond movie is just him in that chair, because he's different Bonds with different women, and it's not consistent, and that actually every James Bond movie, all 24 James Bond movies, is him just being tortured by Blofeld. There's something very dark about that.
Yeah, sounds horrendous.
I think there was something similar about Friends. I think somebody came up with a theory that Phoebe at the end is just like, she stays alone in the cafe.
That's right, you told me that. Yeah,
she's imagining that, like, the whole thing is just like imagined by her. She's crazy.
Like, she's just nuts. Yeah.
Yeah. No, but I think that just like the threat of him losing his humanity actually is something that keeps people coming back to the movies.
I mean, honestly, absolutely. And I think this is why the baddies aren't subjectivized. I mean, in things like Mission Impossible, in Batman, in James Bond, the enemy is having excessive jouissance. They are having even when they're robbing a bank, they're already loaded. Even when they're doing something, it's like they've already got millions or billions. Yeah. And it's because
even when they're dying, they enjoy it.
Exactly. There's like this, in fact, and the Joker is the perfect example. He's literally got a smile etched on his face. He literally is excessive jouissance, and we hate the person who has excessive jouissance. The fantasy of the non-castrated other.
Yeah,
it's interesting. Like in our sorry, go on.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say, in our it is a something of our contemporary scene that we have a real. Although it's just the nature of all myths and civilizations, and making sense of the kind of absolute chaos of everything, is that there is an uncastrated other out there.
Yeah.
But it's funny that there's such a within capitalism, and I have a theory about this that's not really related to it, but like why there's a whole drive to show how you are uncastrated, how you are impotent in capitalism.
Say it again, sorry.
So we have this fantasy that there's this non-castrated other, but like, why has it become a commodity to prove to the world that you are uncastrated yourself.
Oh no, that you are castrated. I would have thought, because that's
you
become
are. You know, that's what I said. That's what I said.
Oh yeah.
You are.
Oh yes.
You
yes.
are. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, yeah. Have you got any thoughts on that?
I do have a few thoughts, but yeah.
Well, because it's closer to. It's closer to having something to risk, I think, and that's what gets people sort of like at the edge of their seat.
Yes.
And I think that there's something about having the possibility of something being lost, and at the end, actually, you don't lose it. Like Bond doesn't get lobotomized, and like he still manages to repress his repression. And I think that that's like extremely gratifying. But the closer that you get, the more pleasure that it like generates for the viewer, I think.
And the real pleasure, I think, of these movies is seeing the non-castrated other ripped of their pleasure. I mean, that's kind of like, partly it's seeing Bond or whatever superhero getting the woman at the end or whatever, but a lot of it is the pleasure of stripping this other who has everything, because it's always it's the good guy who has the damaged relationships, has the dead family. I mean, Jean-Claude Van Damme movies and Steven Seagal movies generally start with their families being destroyed. They often it's often like the child is killed or the wife is killed, or there has to be this ripping away from by this all-powerful kind of megalomaniac. So yeah, it's a fascinating structure.
But it's the same. It's the same with things like Gladiator. But you almost think, I mean, to talk non-psychoanalytically about it, you kind of have to justify these days why someone would be violent. in a much more kind of like humanized world. So yeah, you couldn't just justify like bang 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 with no reason. But I really like the point that Adrian, you were making about that kind of dualism between like getting that kind of lost object or that fantasy.
Or
and
not getting it, just like repeating.
Not getting and not
loss,
getting it. But the closer you are to getting it, really keeps the thing going. If you were too far, you wouldn't have like a perpetual... If you didn't have that antagonism between getting it and not getting it, or becoming close to it and not getting it, you wouldn't have the perpetual revolution and the perpetual enjoyment of having 25 Bond films.
Yeah.
It's like,
so, even though we know he's not going to get it, we're still... in for the ride.
You get enjoyment out. But imagine what the Bond sequel would have been to Casino Royale if he actually would have stayed with Vesper. Like you see him like back at home and he's already like
it's impossible.
Dead, and he's like he gained a little weight and everything. It's like and he like really seals it at the end because she dies and he completely like lets go of her. I think one of the last lines is just like the bitch is dead. So it's just like he completely like forgets her and he represses her as well. And that allows for the sequel to be like the same as the others, I think. And is
it his On His Majesty's Secret Service, which is the one where he actually does get married, and it does have the happy ending, and it's an incredible scene at the very end. And I think I might be wrong about the name of the Bond. I'd have to, if we were in the Joe Rogan show, we'd be looking it up online. But it's the one where at the very, very end, his wife is literally shot in front of him, and he is weeping over his wife's dead body, and then the closing credits come up. I mean, what an incredible end! Like
that happens.
Yeah, that happens. It's literally it's the Bond movie with the guy only ever did one Bond.
Timothy Dalton.
What's that?
Timothy Dalton.
No. It's earlier than that. It was this guy who was a mechanic, and he'd never acted really before, and he was chosen to be Bond, and yeah,
he was just like a handsome guy or whatever.
He was a handsome guy. Yeah, he had this kind of charisma.
I have to look this. I have to look this up. This is going to annoy me. Actually.
Yeah, look it up because I would love to know the right title. Because otherwise, it'll be.
Which one did you call on Her Majesty's Secret Service?
I don't think it is all the time. Yeah, basically, it's like the third or fourth Bond. It's an early Bond.
So, but doesn't it make sense that maybe that's the one that people remember the least?
Oh yes,
because it has that.
He was the most human Bond, and it's the movie that sticks in people's mind the least. Yeah, of all of them,
because it doesn't have that repetition thing to it.
But then, kind of on the other side, and I guess it speaks to your point, Adrian, about coming close to the fantasy. Daniel Craig, you could argue, is kind of the most humanized Bond, aside from that one when he gets married. And it's extremely, extremely popular, particularly Skyfall and Casino Royale have been really resonated with people. So, you know, it's kind of, maybe they've got the perfect mix right, where they give us a bit of like proximity to that fantasy and then rip it away.
Yeah.
It also has that dimension of contemporary ideology, which is that the hero has to have a cut. They have to have some sort of problem. But as soon as you subjectivize the bad guy, they're no longer bad. So if you take something like The Sopranos, as soon as you subjectivize the baddie, then they're not a baddie. So I always feel that the limit for a Bond movie or a John Wick movie is you cannot have the baddie as castrated, except if you're wanting to turn them into something less bad. Like the baddie has to have pure. It's not Bond that's not divided. It's not Bond who's the undivided subject. It's the baddie that is. Yeah, that's the weird thing.
Yeah. Otherwise, you get like Breaking Bad, where he's doing bad things and everybody is, you know, on his side.
Exactly.
So what do you guys? Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, so whenever we talk about the non-castrated other and we think about heroes being it, it's actually not. It's the baddies that are, and that's what's really interesting is sometimes it's the fantasy of the other having something that we hate. It's not that we want it; it's that we want to strip it from.
But do you not think that this is something that was different in the past? So, for instance, you look at Hollywood stars of the 30s, 40s, 50s, and they were kind of like demigods. And the more successful, more beautiful, more perfect you were, the more attractive. Whereas now, you know, you look at someone like Keanu Reeves has become quote unquote the internet's boyfriend, and everyone loves him because he's so nice and so down to earth and so normal and so apparently, you know, the typical divided subject. So, you know, it's just interesting how the villain is now the quote unquote, not perfect, not in the sense of like good, but perfect as in apparently whole.
And Keanu Reeves has this thing, and it's terrible to say, but not only in the movies does he lose his wife, but in real life he lost his partner, you know, so that like in one sense he's the perfect it's very sad, but it's the perfect kind of like there's something about him in real life and in his character that is very appealing, ideologically speaking.
And do you have any explanation as to why these days it's so important for us to identify with, you know, heroes that are split subjects?
Adrian, do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, just as a quick aside, I think what I'm understanding is that the hero is under threat of undergoing like a psychotic breakdown or castration. And sometimes I think maybe the pleasure of seeing the hero is that it flirts with castration. And sometimes it happens, but then comes repression after that. But that the villain never goes through that. The villain never loses anything.
Yeah.
Because doesn't what's the Javier Bardem, the character, the bad guy, at the end, doesn't he almost die like in extreme joy? Like
which one? In what movie?
In Skyfall.
I think Skyfall,
yeah.
Doesn't he die like in the arms of M or something like that? I kind of forgot.
He also has a justification because he was like treated so terribly by that.
Yes, but he has a smile. Like he has a smile throughout, and you're right. Even in death, he's kind of like this. It's like the Cheshire Cat. Even actually, when he's dead, I don't know if he literally has a smile in his dead body, but there is that sense, like the Cheshire Cat, that even when his being is going, the smile remains. Yeah, that's
there's that scene where he takes out all his prosthetics in his face, and even that I can just remember like the VFX. That kind of like it's all smile orientated. No, I was just gonna say about like
that's true. That's pretty good.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Why I think it's a symptom of meritocracy that we want to see heroes who are castrated, because meritocracy and neoliberalism and the kind of contemporary scene is a kind of lie that you're absolutely free and you earn whatever you get. And so in the past, you know, we had much more of a system that wasn't better, but it was just different. You know, it's almost like the kind of the feudal system where it's like, you know, God made them high and mighty and ordered their estate. So back in the day, you know, you knew that you were just kind of a worker with no hope for whatever. but you had these kind of demigods that you could never aspire to be, but there was some kind of entertainment or diversion, or like kind of like a window into a different life. Whereas now our apparent freedom, I think it does speak to the and also because capitalism always wants to find new boundaries and places to enter into, so private life is capitalized on. But I do think that kind of split subject as a commodity or as something that is seen as a good thing, it's kind of like, oh, this person has overcome, and overcoming is a big narrative in meritocracy and the apparent freedom of neoliberalism. So I think that's
it's
why
a finding fantasy of you can overcome, and that's an interesting point. Also, you could say that just it's all that's happening, and I don't know if this is true. I'm going to throw it out and let you guys critique me, but that it's just about where the pleasure's located. So in movies, actually, we think we don't like the baddie, but I think now the baddie is the uncastrated other, and actually our enjoyment of the baddie is often where our real enjoyment is. So we both enjoy
I think that's true,
the uncastrated other, and they have all this sex, they have all this money, they have all this work. So maybe in the past we identified with the hero, whatever, but now we identify with the evil character.
Yeah,
but
and
of
you
course,
see something like the Joker. Sorry.
Yeah, but then consciously we want to, at the very end, for our own morality's sake, you have the death of that person, and you know, we take it away. But I see it myself when I was watching a Mission Impossible recently, and I know that I was enjoying the baddie more than I was enjoying the goodie. What's his name? Ethan Hawke.
Ethan, no, Tom Cruise.
Yeah, well, but his name is Ethan Hawke, I think.
It is Ethan Hawke. I thought, what's the actor called? Isn't that the actor's Ethan Hawke?
No, that's his acting name.
Ethan Hunt.
Ethan Hunt.
Ethan
Thank
Hunt.
you.
That's it. That's another one with the name means something, like he's going and hunting
Ethan
out
Hawke
baddies.
is the first reformed guy. Yeah.
Exactly.
You've got to know that.
Do you know,
like, it's funny, within the fundamentalists, I get every fact wrong about popular culture. So I just let you know.
Just say your name, we'll work it out. No, but I think you're absolutely right about the baddie, and Suicide Squad's a good example. That we were it was such a big movie, and it's getting made again. It clearly has commercial appeal, and there's so many after Heath Ledger's iteration of the Joker, we've got Joaquin Phoenix, Jared Leto, and it's having all of these, like, there's a real mythology that's being explored around the baddie. And then obviously Suicide Squad, you've got the Harley Quinn, you've got little girls dressing up as Harley Quinn for Halloween. There's obviously like a big
that's almost like the return to trying to bring the uncastrated other back onto the side of the hero. So it's always like the uncastrated other is in the villain, and Suicide Squad, I think part of its success, even though the critics hated it, the part of the success is they understood that they could bring that jouissance back onto the side of the hero by making the villains the heroes. It's very clever.
Do you think that should happen though? I mean, it's like one of Hitchcock's famous quotes is like, he said that the villain makes the picture.
I think so.
Is there something about a bad guy always having that position that?
Well, that's why.
Go ahead. Yeah.
Oh yeah, I was going to say you're absolutely right, but that's why in Suicide Squad they have to make another villain. That's like I don't know who the villain was.
A villain
in the last
worse
one.
than the villain. They had the Cara Delevingne character who was like that ghost thing or whatever.
Oh, and then the alien. So I think you're right. It's like as soon as you make the villains the goodies, of course you have to bring in another, and the villain.
Well, this is it. Yeah.
Oh, go ahead.
Sorry, I was going to say, like when you are structuring a narrative, and obviously like the villain is like the objet petit. It's like you don't get a story without a villain. The villain is definitely the thing. If there was no villain, there'd be no story. There'd be no. Yeah.
So maybe go ahead.
Well, I was just gonna say, what do you guys think then about? I don't know if you saw it, but like in Black Panther, for example, the Black Panther is non-castrated, and the villain is castrated. So a lot of people, and I think I agree, is like actually the hero is the bad guy. He's
I think Black Panther
he wants to break open the state of Wakanda or whatever, and he wants to like help people outside of it. Yeah. So there's like a political kind of, he's kind of like a leftist figure in the movie, but he's the castrated one.
Well,
he's the one that is lacking.
I think the Black Panther has a lot to do with contemporary ideology.
Yeah, but here's the thing as well, is like, I think that's a very good point with Black Panther is it complicates those dynamics, but it almost shows that all you need is a non-castrated other, excessive jouissance, and someone who is divided. And those can move around. It's weird. You can kind of you can put them in various places.
Well, in screenwriting, you don't call the villain, you call him the opponent, because the opponent isn't necessarily the baddie. He's just the person that gets in the way of what the hero wants to achieve by the end of the movie. So, but it was interesting because like Todd was talking about this in relation to 2049, and I think this actually relates a lot to this kind of complicating of who's the villain, who's the goodie, because you see a lot of movies now where the state is the goodie and the like non-state, i.e. the capitalists, are the baddies. So you've got the corporation in 2049 versus the replicant police, and in James Bond it's like the establishment Secret Service against the corporation.
Yeah. I mean,
so it's funny how things like flip around. Yeah,
and that's the interesting thing about Bond. Another point is that the baddies are, in a way, what G.K. Chesterton would say is they're committing a crime, but not because they are radically outside the system. They want to get into the system. Like they believe in private property. They just want to have it. They within Quantum of Solace, Quantum is a wing of Spectre, and Spectre is basically in all sorts of industries. I mean, basically, Quantum of Solace is the most hilarious baddies. They want to be a utilities company in Bolivia. It's like so boring. It's so boring. Yeah. But they want to commit a crime so that they can enter the system. So it's funny, whereas James Bond has no interest, so they're pathologically interested in the sense of the Kantian sense of they have self-interest, whereas Bond, every time Bond goes into a casino and he wins lots of money, what does he do? He doesn't care. He often throws the money away.
Well, he's the old money. He's old money. He's eaten old money. He's not even very high up. He just doesn't, he doesn't have anything to prove.
But he's got no pathological interest in the accumulation of money, whereas Spectre is obsessed with it.
Yeah. No, absolutely.
Do you think that this is? Do you think that there's enjoyment in that? Because I think Ready Player One is the same. Like the corporations are the bad guys, and then government comes in and like puts injunctions there so that there's like some rules, like putting regulations basically. And do you think that maybe that's some kind of enjoyment, apocalyptic enjoyment or dystopian, because it's almost like that'll never happen, or it feels like that will never happen, at least in the US?
I do think like the state is becoming more and more the underdog when you look at like how far Amazon etc. has encroached in like lobbying and stuff. Well, maybe that's just a fantasy. Maybe that is a fantasy. Yeah, but
yeah.
But also, I wonder whether, and coming back to the point I was making, where you can almost swap around where enjoyment is and it doesn't matter, is that actually, without knowing it, so consciously we think we're with James Bond, but actually unconsciously, Spectre has got our real pleasure, is our real desire, because actually we identify more with the corporation. Like, there's something really annoying about Bond when he just doesn't care about money. There's almost
I know some people
you won
like
all
that.
this money in the casino and you just threw it away. So I wonder whether at an unconscious level we actually are more connected with Spectre than we are with the MI6.
Yeah, you don't get monks. You don't get monks. Monks aren't the hero of our contemporary ideology. You're not like, maybe you could get a monk in a movie, but do you know what I mean? They're people who are completely disinvested from accumulation. It's just like,
that
would be
what I mean? It's like, I suppose the Dalai Lama is famous, but you know what I mean? It's not like.
Yes, and you have the films like Equilibrium, where the heroes are monk type characters. And so I'm almost just thinking out loud of going like, there's a question of who we consciously identify with, and then there's a question of who we unconsciously identify with. The difference in pleasure and desire, really. At a conscious level, we love Bond, and Bond's very cool, but there's something very appealing about the all-powerful Spectre.
There's something I thought was quite interesting that you touched on, that kind of looking at how Marx and the idea of like commodity as the like mythological element of our contemporary ideology, and that we have all these
which
other
was a conversation we had outside of this podcast, so we might have to talk around it.
I'm going to explain.
Yes.
So we're talking about, we have all these. So you put it really well the other day, like contingent issue problems, and then a structural problem. And the structural problem is really, the commodity form, surplus value generated by the abuse of workers. And then you have all these other contingent things that are issues and narratives that kind of interweave. And you can almost like identify anything or put things anywhere, but there's like a core element, which is a commodity. And almost in James Bond, you could say like the core thing potentially is the jouissance of whatever the narrative generates, but it doesn't matter, there's no like political side on which that falls, or any like sensical narrative side on which that falls, but it just has to fall somewhere.
Yeah, well, actually, the baddies in Quantum of Solace say, your man Green says, we work with the right, we work with the left, we work with revolutionaries, we work with governments. It's like, doesn't,
well, that is exactly how capitalism works. As long as there's a buck to be made, it doesn't matter who it makes the buck off.
Yeah, I mean, Oh, go ahead, Adrian. Sorry.
No, I was just gonna say that. I think it almost doesn't matter as long as that function of disavowed enjoyment is there. Do you think that people misunderstand where their enjoyment comes from? Like they think it's coming from the hero, but it's coming from the villain or otherwise?
Absolutely. Well, that's why you can't have a good Hollywood movie without a great villain. That's you quoted Hitchcock on that, but it's like if you don't have a maniacal. I mean, here's the thing. I almost think you have to have a non-pathological bad guy, and this almost sounds like it contradicts what I've just said. So basically, in Bond, on the surface level, everyone's pathologically invested. The baddies, they want money, they want power, right? So they just want basically what everybody wants. They're willing to commit crime to get it. However, there's something going on that's even deeper, and I think Austin Powers showed it really well whenever Dr. Evil was taken out of his hibernation, and he said something like, I'm going to hold the world to ransom for $30 million. And his next in command says, basically, listen, we earn 5 times that every year with our like legitimate corporations.
I think it's just like 1 million or something.
Oh yeah, 1 million. Yeah, and the guys go like, listen, we own Starbucks. We make 50 million every year. And what I love about that is you kind of go, oh, there's something that Dr. Evil's interested in, which is beyond pathological interest in money. Yeah. He's actually committed to transgression itself. He wants the transgression, and I think that's what makes a really good baddie. That's why I originally suggested the movie The World Is Not Enough for the Bond that we would look at, because I remember that baddie as being just interested in the destruction of the world without any interest. But I was wrong, because even he was trying to help some women have a monopoly in oil. But there is something about Spectre that wants money and power, but beyond that, they just want to see the world burn,
That's what happens in The Dark Knight, I think, or like that's the explanation that Alfred gives about the Joker, like that he doesn't have a reason. He just wants to see the world burn. At what point do you think that maybe that's like even more enjoyable because it's a mental
pure
illness,
waste,
probably?
Oh right, yeah.
Yeah, a mental illness, but also actually weirdly close to the truth that there's something excessive beyond, like, and it's the Marquis de Sade. It's the kind of this weird. Zizek says it beautifully when he talks about fascism, because the fascist is the person who gives up their pleasure Like they literally give it up. They say, we will die for our country. It's all discipline. They shave their heads. They're willing to die. But of course, the fascists, you can just see pleasure oozing from them. Like the Nazis have fetishistic clothes. It's like there is the pleasure of renouncing pleasure. And that's jouissance. I mean, if you want to know what jouissance is in a nutshell, it's like the pleasure that comes beyond pleasure, like
and this
utilitarian
is where
pleasure.
The Reichian analysis of the Nazis is kind of completely opposite to what potentially a Freudian or a Lacanian analysis of the Nazis would be. You know, it's kind of the problematic renunciation of pleasure for Reich or whatever. But you just have to look at the garb, the Nazi garbs, and it's pure
fetishistic pleasure,
masochism. It's sex is rife, and like people. Well, obviously, there's reasons why people dress as like have Nazi fetishes or whatever. That guy, the son of there's some Oswald Mosley's son, who's like a newspaper person in the UK, was caught at a Nazi orgy dressed as a Nazi or something. It was, he completely owned it. It's like, that's just some fetish or whatever, but it's obviously seen as extremely problematic. But the point being that, it's extremely sexualized.
It's very sexualized, absolutely.
Yeah.
So,
renunciation.
There's this weird thing in the body that they're interested in some sort of particular capitalistic goal to increase capital, and yet, of course, they're just getting pure pleasure from the very act of transgression, which makes them even more kind of scary or something, and even more relatable in some respects.
Oh yeah, I was going to say the opposite.
But isn't capitalism sort of like the perfect place to do that? Because isn't that transgressive, like by nature, that it's not about, no amount will ever be enough.
Yes,
it's just gain in itself.
Yeah.
And in a sense, you could say that a true capitalist is the one who has renounced use value, as in they've renounced pleasure, in the sense that, like, if you're selfish, you want to increase your use value, you want things that are useful, and you purchase things that are useful. But when you are fully given over to the capitalist system, all you're interested in is exchange value. You're just interested in the abstract increase of capital without necessarily any use value. And so that is a weird renunciation of utilitarian pleasure for some sort of excessive jouissance that comes from renunciation itself.
Satisfaction.
Yeah.
Yeah, if you just had your sandwich and were satiated, like.
Yeah. So in a sense, so in a sense, the Bond baddie is a perfect representation of something true in capitalism itself, you could say, for two reasons. One, because in a sense, as I say, they don't want to destroy the system. They just want to be on top of the system. So that's in one way they want to kind of enter capitalism at the top. But then secondly, because there is no limit to what they want. They are excessively interested in the perpetual movement, but they get pleasure without object.
Yeah. You think this is kind of like a slightly distant point to make, but just all this talk about pleasure, villains, and the kind of dualistic nature of how we generate desire and how we get ourselves going. Obviously you can see this a lot in a lot of political and cultural antagonisms you see. You can't have one side without the other, and the absolute pleasure that's generated in a perceived opposition or a real opposition, and there's a whole kind of pleasure generated figure of eight that's happening there that people want to be part of, rather than, there's something really to it that generates a kind of jouissance. Absolutely.
Do you, I've been wanting to ask you, like, what do you think about Bataille? Because he has some stuff on transgression and excess and all of that. Have you gotten into his work at all?
I did a long time ago. I read The Story of the Eye, and I read The Accursed Share, and there is this...
The Story of the Eye is pretty graphic.
Yes, it's very intense. And there's something about just, I'm kind of saying this for myself to remind myself, but he's all about this need to, the religious sacrifice, the religious festival is almost like this excessive destructive activity that stands against economics. Isn't that right? Is that correct? That he's basically that we as human beings need these extravagant, destructive activities. Maybe Saturday night's a good example, where there's no utilitarian value to it at all. There is kind of like, and that's the original religious sacrifice. You actually destroy the best sheep that you have, the best cow that you have. It's like it's a pure act of excessive enjoyment without return.
It's the residue of economic life.
Yes, I mean,
he makes that sort of parallel between just like regular economics and like libidinal economy, which always has like this excess.
Yeah. So I'm just going back to your point about the capitalist who isn't interested in the utilitarian nature of things. But can you say that the most capitalistic person is the person who turns everything into a utilitarian value, like everything they do? So it's not necessarily just about, like, capitalism isn't just about money. It's about capitalizing. You can there's cultural capital. There's like, it's not just, it can be like a psychic thing. It's not just about the generation of money, wealth, etc.
Yeah.
There's a capitalist structure at play in people who obsessively exercise or.
Well, yeah, I mean, one of for me, I kind of go back to some of Marx's kind of like very pithy sayings, and one is that you can have systems that are CMC systems, so commodity, money, commodity, which is I create a commodity, I go into the market, I get money for it to buy another commodity that's useful to me. And then you enter into a model which can be described as MCM, which is I have money, I buy commodities, a factory, workers, etc., so that I can create commodities to make more money. So now money is not simply the kind of like the thing that makes exchange helpful. It becomes a property in itself. And I think once you enter into an MCM model, you're weirdly acting not in your self-interest. You're weirdly acting, I think, and this is with the zombie, Shizak talks about the zombie, but you're acting in this weirdly obsessive way that doesn't necessarily have to be selfish. It can be selfish, but weirdly, you can have a capitalist who drives a 15-year-old car, lives in a shack,
absolutely,
and is making money. Like, there's no necessary connection to selfishness at all.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. Interesting.
Well, and also that it's experienced as a duty.
Yes.
That almost as a sacrifice of the self. It's like, it comes, pursuit, my eternal pursuit comes before me. And
I think that's the word, sacrifice is the word.
Yes.
That's capitalism is sacrifice. Yeah. So it's interesting actually though, like relating that to sacrifice in terms of Bataille's point. How does that fit? Because he's talking about like the sacrifice being anti-capitalistic almost.
Yes, whereas
but actually capitalism is all about
sacrifice.
Sacrifice.
Yeah, Todd McGowan, he did a great talk in Belfast about this, and you guys were there. But where he says there's willing sacrifice, there's unwilling sacrifice, and then there's sacrifice you don't know about. And weirdly, for us in capitalism, we can sometimes think that we're acting in our own self-interest. Like the capitalist is the most kind of honest person, because they go, I'm acting in my own self-interest. Other people pretend they aren't. They pretend they're doing charity work for other reasons. But listen, I'm self-interested and I'm honest about it. And then Todd's point, which I think is a really interesting point, of course, the psychoanalytic point, is no, if you were self-interested, once you'd made 10 million or 20 million or whatever, you'd stop and enjoy it.
Call it quits,
You're weirdly destroying yourself. The cunning of capitalism it destroys you without you even knowing it.
I know this is the funny thing, and I think part of the idea of we're talking about why we identify so much with the traumatized hero, whatever, and like the personal story is becoming so to the surface in capitalism. It's just interesting that like people don't realize when they are talking about all their aspects of personal life as part of their work or part of their they talk about I've had to go through this, I've had to go through that they're just unknowingly commodifying their private life And it's nothing to do with money, apparently, on a first level. But it basically, you know, capitalism can encroach in so many different ways, and you can totally unknowingly think that you're doing something rebellious or countercultural, but completely buying into or perpetuating the system even more.
Yeah. It's amazing. It's amazing how capitalism commodifies it, and at the moment we're now commodifying our private space. We're even commodifying our traumas. I mean, we can commodify, like, it's incredible, our inner world. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I have to say, this is going to be maybe a gross out one, but. Okay, so you have social media, which is obviously commodifying the private life and feeling compelled even when it's nothing to do with your work. Have I posted enough? Or, you know, how many likes did I get? I mean, what the fuck? You might be like a librarian, and this still feels important in the kind of capitalist system that we're in today. There's a lot of like, so then you have the private trauma, et cetera, et cetera. But now I have noticed there's a lot of like gross out stuff that's being commodified. It's like how brave you are to like expose even like physically your boobs on whatever, you know, like free the nipple, or I'm sorry, but there's like a period thing that like people post that, and that's all. It's like becoming closer and closer and closer and closer to the body. It's interesting to see like where it'll go next, you know.
Yeah.
But yeah,
there was a picture that I saw the other day of a guy that had taped a used pad to his face, to his nose.
Oh wow!
And then he was saying, and the caption was something like that this guy was doing it in order to show his girlfriend or something that he was a feminist or something, that he was on the side of women not having any shame because they have the period or whatever. But it's just like, it's very clear that this guy was just like hiding behind feminism in order to satisfy his fetish.
Yes.
But that's the thing. The thing is though, if it was just for his girlfriend, then he'd do it just for his girlfriend. You wouldn't find out. He wouldn't have posted it online unless somebody else took a photo of it and posted it without him knowing. But like, that speaks to a commodification of that act. So it's commodifying your fetish.
There's an interesting point there. It's the commodification of fetish and the normalization, i.e. you can actually hide one's fetish under kind of some sort of normality. So whereas rather than go ahead.
Well, do you think that maybe it makes it easier for people? I don't think, I'm not sure about this, but do you think it makes it easier for people to enjoy to sexually something when it's commodified, because it's easier to disavow it? Like it's mediated, I think.
Yes, you're getting enjoyment.
Because doesn't it require a bit more engagement or a bit more courage for something not to be commodified and for you to enjoy it either way?
Yeah, the difficulty is, funnily enough, when it comes to our unconscious pleasure, by definition, that is generally difficult for us to share. So actually, I'm wondering whether actually we are commodifying fetishism, because actually I think when something touches on your deep sexuality, you inherently find that very difficult to.
You find it like kind of a rape if you're not, if it's not
ashamed about it.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. But the thing is, it's like, I wonder if it's like a certain structure of person might get it, you know, might find that arousing or something. But you know, maybe it's this fetish. It's like capitalism has maybe a commodified fetish culture by extracting it from sex and potentially.
No, but then the enjoyment's elsewhere. So like for some people, their enjoyment is shocking people.
Yeah, absolutely. That's exactly what I meant.
The enjoyment isn't in, say, putting a used tampon on your face. The enjoyment is knowing that that's going to shock people and kind of and enjoying being the one who's shocking, but you can't admit that to yourself, because that's the thing you can't admit.
That's like masochism. It's not so you can commodify shame as long as you're a masochist. Is that what you're saying? Like,
as long as you're not consciously aware of it, maybe.
That could be the case. That could be the case. But the point that I'm making, and then I'd like to explore that, because I think you could be saying something really true there. But what I was thinking was more that a person can, it's generally speaking, when we're confronted with where the true locus of our enjoyment is, we freak out. So when someone does something very extreme, the enjoyment is actually hidden still, but what is hidden in is the real enjoyment is in the shock value itself. But again, that has to be disavowed.
But this is the thing, because often, like, when you actually, and you see it in politics, often people don't want to admit what the real problem is, and there's like an absolute everybody shut up, don't say it, when it actually touches on the real thing.
Yes.
And you can dance around it with all sorts of other things, but as soon as you touch on the real thing, but you know, this is an interesting thing you're talking about, because I think Conor Habib has talked about this, where he has said, I don't want to misquote him, that, you know, he thinks that the sex worker is the only quote unquote worker that's outside capitalism. And I do and don't agree with that. But the point maybe where he could be correct is that when it comes to sex or actual fantasy, can that be capitalized on? But then obviously that's different, because when you're turning it into work, I obviously I can't speak to that world at all, but I heard him talk to a Marxist about it, and I think they had a disagreement. But like, there's a different, you know, when it comes to fantasy.
Yes,
But
because
then
even
it's like,
the masochist doesn't want to be exposed. The masochists, if someone, I mean, I think of the Sartrean kind of idea that whatever you're doing behind closed doors, if you imagine someone's looking through the keyhole at you, it immediately takes you out of the pleasure of it, and it kind of makes you feel icky. It's the opposite.
Unless you're into like voyeurism or whatever.
But even then, I think it has to be within your fantasy frame.
Yeah.
Like that as soon as the voyeur is put in court, in front of like a neutral judge, they can feel violated. So
yeah.
But
Yeah,
anyway,
that's pretty good.
But then it's like,
Well,
you know,
and
potentially the person who, I don't know if that, does that apply to every structure, as in like the psychotic, the neurotic, and the pervert?
Yeah,
Or
I mean,
are there some people who do, you know?
Yeah. Oh, sorry, Adrian, do you want to say something about that, or something?
No, I was just gonna ask, like, what do you guys think about, does commodifying all of these experiences or these objects, does that explain like the success of capitalism, because it mediates between you and the horrific sort of like directness of confronting like your sexual fetish or your pleasure or whatever. So if you use commodification as a in-between thing, maybe it helps to sort of like water it down or whatever. It makes it a little bit more easy to confront, I guess.
There is like, it definitely, like, sex is definitely prevalent in a way that it wasn't, and it kind of like watered down, as in like you see things that are sexual but not things that necessarily turned you on as a person. And obviously there's like a commodification of that whole thing with things like Tinder, and you're putting it, but I don't know if when it comes to actual sex.
Yeah, and I have.
I mean, I'm not saying that I'm not defending like the commodification. I think that there's something about the transgression that is actually should be enjoyed, and that maybe there's an injunction against it when it comes to capitalism, and it tries to like it tries to cover over everything. But I don't know. It just it seems
that's
interesting to me. Maybe that's why. Maybe that's why millennials like don't have sex, is because everything is commodified and they've lost the taste for like transgression.
I think, I mean, that's more where I'm going, is that I think there's something inherently traumatizing about encountering our own locus of pleasure, and the weirdly, and actually where a lot of pleasure is precisely in the transgression, in doing something that is a little bit shameful, guilt-ridden, all of that. And so weirdly, in a society where everything is more and more permissible, you will get extremes of puritanical culture. You'll get extremes of people, the desexualization of sex itself. And there's something about our pleasure that I think you cannot confront without trauma. Maybe
so where do you think then, like, sexual fantasy is going? So millennials are having less sex, and then obviously when it's in the public realm, it's not really sexualized sex. So where is that fantasy going? I guess it's just like porn on the internet. I don't know.
It might be in some kind of closeness, because the sort of like the openness of sexuality and how exposed bodies are now is just like it can become a little bit oppressive or just overwhelming to the point that it loses its sexuality. I think that maybe there needs to be a recourse back into sexuality as lacking, or something that is covering over a lack.
Yeah.
and being able to admit that in the traumatic core of sexuality in that way.
I mean,
But
the
yeah, no, I
most
do-
fascinating sexual act for me, or sexual position, is courtly love. I think courtly love is fascinating because courtly love ultimately covers over the lack by a lack. It ultimately, so courtly love is you perpetually put off sex. You perpetually postpone the act. You make it impossible. You put up so many obstacles precisely so as to deny the lack that is within sex itself. So, and I think courtly love is something that we in the West definitely revolve around to some extent and is part of our psychic structure. It's the lack that covers over the lack.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's pretty good.
Yeah, no, I do think it's interesting. I do think that, the bubbling up of sex into the public realm, things being so visible. I personally read Me Too as a response to feeling violated. And I think it's not a coincidence that Me Too is of 2016, 2017, 2018, 2019, not 1960. Like, Me Too didn't happen then. I think people feel more violated now than they did then.
Yeah. Yeah.
But, things were it was all arranged in a different way. But I think there's something, traumatic about it.
That's a good point. All right. Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
should we end it there? I think that's a good note.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I feel like we had this. I really loved this because I feel like we were just thinking together, kind of like thinking through things about how jouissance works within movies and sex, desire, pleasure. So yeah, it was really enjoyable. I don't know if we came to many conclusions, but hopefully people will enjoy the wandering conversation.
Yeah, no, this is the enjoyment for perpetually thinking you're going to get like a point, but you never
Yes,
get it.
this is a more courtois. This is courtly love. It's the perpetual postponement of a point
Meandering.
that makes you
was
fantasize that there
performative,
is
the
a
whole
point.
thing,
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. That's
We're
that's going to
performing
be
our own
like
point,
our tagline,
Yes, I like
perpetually
that. I like
revolving
that.
around a point.
Yes.
All right.
Okay.
All right. Thank you.
Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.
Fantastic.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
All right. Bye.